Mount Shasta has a way of swallowing people. Not all at once. Not dramatically. But slowly, quietly, until it feels as if they were never there at all. On a clear morning in late summer, Evan Calder, 32 years old, drove north on Interstate 5 with the windows down and the radio off. He told no one exactly when he planned to return. Just that he needed a few days. A reset. A break from the noise of his life. Evan had done this before. He was the kind of man who sought out silence when things got heavy. Long hikes, remote trails, places where phone service faded into nothing. Friends described him as steady, thoughtful, not reckless. He wasn't running from anything specific. He wasn't in trouble. He wasn't depressed in any way that raised alarms. Mount Shasta, to Evan, was familiar ground. He had hiked parts of it several times over the years. Never to the summit, never anything extreme, but enough to feel confident. Enough to believe he understood the mountain. That belief would be the first thing the mountain took from him. Evan stopped at a small gas station just outside the town of Mount Shasta City shortly after noon. Security footage later showed him inside the store, buying bottled water, protein bars, and a printed trail map. The clerk remembered him. He seemed normal, she would later tell police. Polite. Quiet. Like a guy who wanted to be left alone. He parked his car near a lesser-used trailhead on the mountain's western slope, one that didn't attract tourists, photographers, or guided groups. It was legal. Marked. But isolated. Evan texted his sister a single message at 12:47 p.m. Heading up Shasta. Back in a few days. That text would become the last digital trace of him for nearly a month. At first, no one worried. Evan had always been independent. He had always disappeared into nature and returned sunburned, sore, and smiling. But when 4 days passed with no call, his sister grew uneasy. By day 6, she called local authorities. By day 7, Evan Calder was officially listed as missing. Search and rescue teams mobilized quickly. Mount Shasta was no stranger to disappearances. Lost hikers, injured climbers, sudden storms. Most cases resolved within days. This one didn't. Search teams followed the obvious paths first. They found Evan's car exactly where it should be, locked, untouched, no signs of struggle. Inside were things he didn't bring with him: spare clothes, a notebook, a camera. What troubled investigators was what wasn't there. His hiking pack was gone. His boots. His jacket. Which meant Evan had gone up the mountain voluntarily. Helicopters scanned tree lines. Dogs tracked scent trails that led upward, then stopped abruptly on rocky terrain where wind erased everything. Rangers searched ravines, snowfields, and forested slopes. Nothing. No dropped gear. No footprints. No torn fabric. It was as if Evan had stepped off the map. Locals weren't surprised. Mount Shasta has long carried an unsettling reputation. Stories passed down quietly, about people who went missing without explanation, about hikers found days later in places already searched, about voices heard where no one stood. Law enforcement dismissed most of it as folklore. But even the most practical rangers admitted one thing: Shasta doesn't behave like other mountains. Weather changes suddenly. Trails vanish under ash and scree. Dense forest swallows sound. And once you step off a known path, distance becomes deceptive. Still, none of that explained the total absence of evidence. By week 2, search teams expanded the radius. By week 3, they began scaling back. Privately, some investigators assumed the worst: a fall into an unrecoverable area, exposure, or a hidden crevice beneath lingering snow. Evan's family was told to prepare themselves. The mountain, it seemed, had claimed another name. Then came the first detail that didn't fit. A volunteer searcher reported something odd during a sweep near a dense stand of old-growth trees, deep scratches carved into the bark of a pine, about 6 feet off the ground. At first glance, it looked like animal damage. But the marks were uneven, jagged, desperate. They photographed it, logged it, moved on. No one connected it to Evan at the time. By day 25, official search operations were suspended. There was no announcement, no press conference, just a quiet acknowledgement that resources had been exhausted. The mountain went silent again. Evan Calder became another missing person file, another photo pinned to a board, another unanswered question. Until the night the mountain screamed back. It was just after 2 a.m. when a park ranger on overnight patrol froze in his tracks. He was driving slowly along a service road near the western slope when he heard something that didn't belong there. A voice. Faint. Broken. Echoing strangely through the trees. At first, he thought it was wind. Shasta was known for it. But then it came again. A hoarse shout. Not an animal. Not the wind. A human voice. Help, please. The ranger stopped the vehicle. Shut off the engine. Stepped out. The forest swallowed the sound almost immediately. Then, again. Long. Drawn out. Weak. Help me. His radio crackled as he called it in, his voice unsteady. This wasn't possible. The search had ended. No one should have been alive out there. Backup was dispatched immediately. And as more responders arrived, the shouting continued, intermittent, fading, then returning, never coming from the same direction twice. As if the mountain itself was throwing the sound around. Searchers moved carefully, triangulating the cries as best they could. What confused them most wasn't the distance, it was the height. The sound wasn't coming from the ground. It was coming from above them, up in the trees. At first, they assumed someone had climbed into a tree for shelter. But as flashlights scanned upward, the beams caught something unnatural. Metal. High above the forest floor. Suspended between thick branches, nearly invisible in the darkness, was a structure no one expected to find. A cage, hanging more than 40 feet in the air. And inside it, a man, barely conscious, barely alive, and unmistakably human. For several long seconds, no one spoke. Flashlight beams trembled as they swept across the metal bars suspended high above the forest floor. The cage was crudely constructed, steel mesh reinforced with thick bolts, hanging from chains looped over massive pine branches. It swayed gently in the night air, creaking softly, like it had been there for a long time. Inside it, slumped against one corner, was a man who barely moved. "Is that a person?" someone whispered into the dark. The answer came when the man lifted his head. A weak, trembling sound escaped his throat, not quite a scream, not quite a word. Just enough to confirm what everyone already feared. Someone had survived a month on Mount Shasta. And someone had put him there. Rescue teams immediately faced a terrifying reality. There was no safe way to reach him. The cage was suspended approximately 45 feet above the ground, anchored to 2 massive branches that looked strong enough to hold, but only barely. Any sudden movement could shift the weight and send the entire structure crashing down. Worse still, the man inside wasn't stable. He drifted in and out of consciousness, his head lolling forward, his body thin to the point of looking unnatural. If he lost consciousness completely, he could slump against the bars and tip the cage. They couldn't afford a mistake. A specialized high-angle rescue team was called in, arriving just before dawn. While they prepared harnesses and climbing gear, one ranger shouted up to the man, asking his name. It took several attempts before a response came. Evan. The name landed heavily among the group. Evan Calder. The man they had stopped searching for. The man they believed was already dead. As daylight broke through the trees, the cage became fully visible. It wasn't something thrown together hastily. The metal showed signs of wear and rust, as if it had been constructed elsewhere and transported up the mountain in pieces. The chains were reinforced. The locking mechanism was external. There was no way Evan could have placed himself inside. Even more disturbing, there was no ladder, no rope, no climbing equipment anywhere near the base of the trees. Whoever put the cage there had planned everything, including how they would leave. A rescuer climbed carefully, inch by inch, attaching a stabilizing line to prevent the cage from swinging. When he finally reached Evan's level, he was hit with the smell first. Dehydration. Waste. Blood. Evan's skin was stretched tightly over bone. His lips were cracked, bleeding. One eye was swollen nearly shut. His hands shook uncontrollably as the rescuer spoke to him. "You're safe," the rescuer said. "We've got you." Evan didn't respond. Instead, his eyes darted past the rescuer, toward the surrounding trees, as if he was looking for someone. It took over an hour to lower the cage safely to the ground. As soon as medics reached Evan, they cut him free and rushed him to a waiting helicopter. He never fully lost consciousness, but he didn't speak either. Not on the flight. Not at the hospital. Doctors later described his condition as severe but survivable. He was dangerously dehydrated, malnourished. His wrists and ankles bore deep abrasions consistent with prolonged restraint. His throat was inflamed, likely from screaming for help for days, possibly weeks, which raised a chilling question. Why had no one heard him sooner? Investigators returned to the site the next morning. Standing beneath the tree, they realized something unnerving. The location sat in a natural acoustic funnel, where sound carried upward and outward in strange ways. Depending on wind direction, Evan's voice could travel miles, or nowhere at all. For weeks, the mountain had swallowed his cries. That night, for reasons no one could explain, it had chosen to release them. Police waited 3 days before attempting a formal interview. Evan lay in a hospital bed, restrained not by cuffs but by exhaustion. His voice, when it finally came, was barely audible. He remembered starting his hike. He remembered leaving the trail. He remembered meeting someone. That was when he stopped talking. His heart rate spiked. His hands trembled. Medical staff intervened, ending the interview. But one detail had already been recorded. Evan hadn't fallen. He hadn't gotten lost. He had encountered another human being on Mount Shasta. Detectives scoured the area again. Still no footprints. No campsites. No equipment. Whoever built the cage had carried it in pieces, assembled it on site, and left without a trace. There were no vehicle records. No missing climbers. No registered permits matching the timeline. No suspects. And yet the precision of the crime suggested someone who knew the mountain intimately. Someone who understood where sound traveled. Someone who understood how long a man could survive without water. A nurse made the observation that reopened the investigation. Evan's injuries weren't consistent with random abuse. They were methodical. His restraints had been loosened and tightened repeatedly, suggesting someone returned. Someone checked on him. Someone kept him alive. Why? That question haunted the investigators. If this wasn't about murder, then what was it? News of Evan's survival spread quickly. Media labeled it a miracle. Locals didn't. They whispered about hunters who never hunted, about cabins that didn't appear on maps, about people who went up the mountain for reasons that had nothing to do with hiking. Detectives dismissed the rumors. But quietly, they expanded their inquiry. Because one truth was undeniable. Evan Calder wasn't abandoned on Mount Shasta. He was placed there. And whoever did it had wanted him to be heard. Just not yet. Evan Calder didn't speak again for nearly a week. Doctors said his body needed time. Investigators suspected his mind needed more. When he finally asked to talk, it wasn't to the police. It was to his sister. Only after she sat beside his hospital bed, only after he made her promise not to interrupt, did he begin to describe what happened on Mount Shasta. And from the very first sentence, it was clear this wasn't a story about getting lost. Evan said the man appeared just after he left the marked trail. He wasn't sudden. He didn't jump out or startle him. He was simply there, standing near a fallen log, as if he'd been waiting. Mid-40s. Dressed like a hiker, but with equipment that didn't quite match, boots too worn, pack too clean. He smiled easily, spoke softly, asked Evan if he needed help navigating a shortcut. Evan said no. The man smiled wider. "You will," he replied. That was the last moment Evan remembered that felt normal. According to Evan, the forest seemed to close in after that encounter. The trail thinned. The light dimmed faster than it should have. He remembered feeling disoriented, then nothing. No blow, no pain, just absence. When he woke, he was already inside the cage. The cage wasn't swaying yet. That came later. At first, it rested lower, only a few feet off the ground. The man stood beneath it, adjusting chains, checking locks. He spoke while he worked. Not angrily, not threateningly, casually. He told Evan the mountain keeps what it wants, and that some people were meant to stay longer than others. He said Evan was lucky. He said most never got a chance to be heard again. Then, slowly, methodically, he raised the cage higher. And left. This was the detail investigators found hardest to process. The man came back. Not every day. Not on a schedule Evan could track. Sometimes he brought water, just enough to keep Evan alive. Sometimes food. Sometimes nothing at all. He never spoke for long, but when he did, he asked questions. Personal questions. Did Evan believe in fate? Did he think people vanished for a reason? Did he think the mountain listened? Evan learned quickly that silence angered him more than answers. So he talked. And the man listened. One night, Evan woke to movement. The cage was rising. Higher than before. Far higher. The chains groaned as the man worked in the dark, pulling, securing, tightening. Evan screamed until his throat burned. The man didn't react. When he finished, he looked up and said something Evan would never forget. "They'll hear you now," he said. "But only when it's time." Evan screamed every day after that. At first, constantly. Then, strategically. He learned how the sound moved, how certain winds carried his voice, how certain hours swallowed it whole. He rationed his strength. Screamed until his throat bled, then rested. Days blurred together. The man returned less frequently. Sometimes Evan wondered if he'd died and been forgotten. Sometimes he was sure he hadn't. Evan had almost given up when he heard voices below. Real ones. Not imagined. Not echoes. He screamed harder than he ever had before. And this time, someone answered. Police documented everything Evan said. Then they tried to verify it. No missing persons matched the description. No hikers reported encounters. No fingerprints were recovered from the cage. No tool marks matched anything in existing databases. The chains and metal were generic, untraceable, and Mount Shasta, as always, refused to give up its secrets. Evan was asked to identify suspects from photo arrays. He couldn't. Asked to sketch the man. The face never came out right. He blended in, Evan said, like he belonged there more than I did. Investigators never publicly disclosed this. But during the final sweep of the area, they found something new. Fresh marks on the tree. Not scratches. Handholds. Someone had climbed up recently, and then climbed back down. Evan eventually left California. He doesn't hike anymore. Doesn't camp. Doesn't go anywhere without telling someone exactly where he's going. He still wakes up at night, convinced the cage is moving. The case remains open. No arrests. No suspects. No explanation. Just a man who vanished on Mount Shasta, and came back with proof that someone up there wanted him alive, and wanted him heard. Because on that mountain, silence isn't emptiness. It's waiting.